And good afternoon. My name is Ryan Belmore, owner and publisher of What's Up Noop. It is Wednesday, July 26th, just after noon. Mr. Frank Prosnitz joins me. Frank, how are you?
I'm doing fine. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. Did you see? We should do a baseball show, but how about that triple play?
Unbelievable, huh? That was crazy.
First time since 1884.
Yeah, but what a weird play.
Yeah. Our guests are going to be like, why do you always start talking about baseball? But every time I see your Baltimore Orioles hat, I have to do something.
It's not coming off until they're out of the playoff race, and that will only be sometime after the World Series and they pick up their rings.
There you go. All right. Well, we are back with one of our conversations with the candidates. We started these last week with Rhode Island Congressional District 1 candidates. I should start doing this as a reminder. Well, I assume if people have gotten this far that they probably know they're in Congressional District 1, but kind of take the east side of Rhode Island. If you are watching in Newport, this is important to you. Aquidneck Island, Newport County, the east side of Rhode Island for the most part, Congressional District 1. We've been interviewing the candidates. We started last week. We had one yesterday. We have two today. A bunch of them. I think we have 7 out of 12 of the Democratic candidates. All of the candidates have been invited to join us. They are still invited to join us, but we are running out of time because we want to end this process prior to people, ahead of people making their votes. Early voting starts in just a couple weeks.
Yeah, we also in between our candidates interviews today, we have Colleen Germain, school superintendent.
Yes, we did.
At 1:30, and then is Gabe at 2:15 or 2:30? I have
2:15. Yep. And just a reminder for anybody watching, if you want to go back and compare contrast candidates, a couple options to do that. You can find all of the videos on whatsupnoop.com. They're also available as podcasts wherever you get your podcasts, where you can listen to them on the go while you're doing whatever it is that you are doing. Today, we are going to be chatting with Aaron Regunberg. And Aaron, how are you?
Doing great. How are you guys?
Doing all right. Aaron, are you following along with all of our baseball chatter?
Oh, yeah. Though I warning, my dog is in the background and was just barking as another dog walked by. So that might happen again.
You have your Orioles hat or your Orioles pennant anywhere?
That's it. Many of us are still mourning the loss of the Paw Sox. So speaking of baseball. But Aaron, you join us today, and you have been a candidate in this race since just about the very beginning. And tell us what, you hear the announcement, broadcast everywhere, that David is going to retire from Washington, D.C. At what point or how long did it take before you knew that you wanted to be a candidate in this race?
Well, first of all, thanks, Ryan and Frank, for having me. I announced my campaign April 10th of this year. So it was a little bit into it. A couple of months had gone by. And for me, the process was really thinking about, I've got a 2-year-old, and being a dad's amazing. But like a lot of parents, I spend a lot of time worrying about the future. Will our kids be safe at school from guns and mass shootings? Will they be able to afford housing and healthcare and college? Will they have clean air to breathe or a functioning democracy by the time they're old enough to vote? But when I'm up late at night, tossing and turning, worrying about these dangers, it's not just fear that I feel. I'm furious, right? Because it's not an accident. None of that's an accident. It's not an accident that more kids die from guns in this country than anywhere else on the planet, right? It's not an accident that our climate's spiraling out of control. It's not an accident that so many working people are struggling right now while corporate profits are literally hitting record highs. The gun industry, fossil fuel companies, corporate CEOs, and their Republican allies are creating and feeding these crises because they're making billions and billions of dollars off of it. And so I feel a lot of urgency in this moment that we're in. That's what motivated me to get in the race. But I also feel a lot of hope. And I'd say that was my other big motivation, as I was thinking about this, as you asked, Ryan. I believe that Rhode Islanders, when we come together, we can take on those kinds of entrenched interests and we can win. And I know that's possible because we've seen it here in Rhode Island. I've been a part of winning real progressive policy change in our state, including in a lot of cases where many people didn't think it was going to be possible. Leading fights to pass paid sick days and raise wages and create new clean energy programs and expand harm reduction strategies for folks struggling with addiction and begin the fight to reform solitary confinement in our prisons. In all of these fights, there were obstacles, there were barriers, there were entrenched interests we went up against, but we organized, we brought folks together, we built broad coalitions, and we figured out how to get it done. And that, I think, is the kind of work we need to be doing in Washington right now. And Rhode Island's first congressional district, I think we need more than just one more Democratic vote in Congress, right? We deserve leaders like David Cicilline, who can organize and bring folks together and have a record of winning real progressive policy change. And that's the work I've been trying to support and contribute to in Rhode Island for many years. And I think it's the kind of work I'd be incredibly honored to be able to contribute to in Washington with and alongside folks like all your listeners.
Aaron, for those people who don't know who you are, who haven't followed you in the legislature or in your race for lieutenant governor, tell us about yourself.
So I got my start in politics as a community organizer. I founded an education justice org here in Providence called the Providence Student Union that brings young people together to fight for changes in our public schools. And that really, that experience taught me how often the folks most impacted by policy don't have a seat at the table in designing it, and how much better outcomes are when the folks who are on the ground actually have a voice and a say. And that's what inspired me to get into politics in the first place. As you mentioned, I served in the state legislature, working to pass policies that would have an actual impact in people's lives, even when there were a lot of barriers to go up against. I remember when I was first elected to the General Assembly, so many people said we would never pass paid sick days. There were too many corporations, too many conservative lawmakers lined up against it. But again, we organized. We brought workers and small businesses and unions together. We knocked on doors. I organized with my legislative colleagues, both the folks who I often agreed with and a lot of the folks that I didn't always agree with. But you build relationships, you find those points of commonality where you can move forward together. And we figured out how to get it done for the 40% of Rhode Island workers who couldn't before, so they could start caring for a loved one or recovering from an illness without having to worry about losing their pay. So that's always been my approach to making change, whether it was as an organizer, as a legislator, most recently as a climate lawyer. I've been working to support the litigation and court cases seeking to hold big oil, Exxon, Chevron, Shell, BP accountable for their decades of climate deception and fraud. And obviously, folks in Newport don't need to hear any more about that because you're seeing it every day. The tide's rising. The dangers are very, very apparent for the climate crisis. And that's an area that I've done a lot of work in. I've, in many ways committed my life to, and I think we desperately and urgently need more leadership in Washington to say we're willing to stand up and take on big oil to fight for real climate action.
Good,
Aaron, if you were to list your top 5 priorities, what would they be?
So we just talked about the climate crisis. Again, that's an issue that, the decisions we make in the next 5 and 10 years are going to set the course of human civilization for the next 10,000 years. And that's not.
What do you say to people who say that perhaps we're too late?
Too late for what? I mean,
that much of the damage that can be done has been done.
So there's been an immense amount of damage done, and we're continuing to do more damage. And every fraction of a degree warmer means millions more lives lost, millions more displaced. And every fraction of a degree that we can keep warming down means those people are saved. I mentioned I've got a 2-year-old. I spend a lot of time worrying about the kind of world he's going to grow up in. And right now we are, as you're saying, Frank, we are firmly on track for that to be an incredibly scary and dangerous place. I'll be honest. I used to this is maybe getting a little too personal for the radio, but I used to deal with a lot of existential dread and depression thinking about the course we are on in the climate crisis. And then I had my son, Asa, and for me, that was sort of like we made this all-in bet that we're going to figure it out because we don't have a choice. We don't actually have a choice. We never had a choice, particularly now that I've got the son. Like, there's no time for nihilism or cynicism, because even if the path to get there is steep and uphill and narrow, there's no choice. We have to win. We have to beat big oil. We have to do this, or we're facing an unlivable future. And again, it's not a black or white thing. It's a spectrum of consequences and calamities. And the more that we do, the faster we can transition to a clean energy future, the more we're going to be able to save of this beautiful and wonderful world and civilization we have. And the good news, because I don't want to be all gloom and doom, the good news is we already have practically everything we need to make that clean energy transition happen, right? The cheapest way to produce electricity right now is to point a piece of glass at the sun. Like, we're living in miraculous times in a lot of ways. The problems aren't technical. The problems are political. We have the fossil fuel industry, the most profitable and powerful industry in the history of mankind, has a stranglehold on our political system. And they have zero interest in allowing for that clean energy transition. Because, you put a solar panel on your roof, you don't have to think about it for 25, 30 years. Oil and gas, we have to keep buying that. We have to keep giving them money week in and week out. It's a money spigot for them. They're going to do everything they can to delay having to turn it off. And so I think it is really, really, really important that we get to a consensus within the Democratic Party that we need to take on big oil head on. We need to get rid of oil and gas subsidies. We need to stop expanding fossil fuel supply and infrastructure. There's so much we can do, but it's going to take a willingness to actually take on these entrenched interests. And that's a big part of why I'm running in this race. So you asked me to list 5, and that was way too long. Sorry about that. I'd say probably the thing that I hear the most as I'm traveling around talking to folks is cost of living crisis, right? Folks are struggling. My wife and I are feeling it with diapers and groceries and health insurance and daycare and utility bills, right? Things are going up and up. A lot of folks are struggling. As I mentioned before, I think it's really important that we remember inflation isn't just something that's happening. It's being done to us, right? Corporate profits are literally hitting record highs right now. There are a lot of people who are profiting off of our pain. And there are simple policy solutions we can take to address that. We can pass policies to stop corporate price gouging, to have price controls on vital prescription drugs, to pass a windfall profits tax like the one Senator Whitehouse has proposed, so that the industries that are profiting off of our pain have to give something back. We can pass the kind of antitrust measures that David Cicilline championed to say that corporations shouldn't be allowed to get so big that they can set prices however high they want without having to worry about competition. We can make real public investments in housing to try to alleviate and address this housing crisis. So that's a thing that a lot of people are feeling. But I think sometimes it comes across as this amorphous, just sort of dynamic versus this is a set of decisions being made largely in corporate boardrooms by folks who are making a lot of money right now. And we can actually take concrete, specific action to address them. So that's a huge issue. That's maybe 2 on that list. 3, I think people are really, really concerned about the assault on our rights by radical MAGA extremists in Washington, and for that matter, on the Supreme Court. And so it is obviously incredibly essential that whoever is our next congressperson is fully committed to the fights to stand up for reproductive justice and abortion access, to stand up to protect our democracy. I'm very proud to have been endorsed by some of the folks who've been leading the fight to defend our democracy, people like Congressman Jamie Raskin, who led the impeachment of Donald Trump for his January 6th insurrection. And so all of that's really, really important. I think it's connected to maybe point 4 on the list, which is court reform, which is, I think, a thing more and more people are talking about. We have a radical Republican majority on the Supreme Court. And much more big picture, we have a Republican Party that for decades now has understood that the courts are political. They're not neutral. They're where policy is made that impacts millions of people's lives. And unlike in many cases the Democratic Party, the Republican Party has mobilized and taken action and said, we're going to take over the courts. We're going to stack them with our extremist activists who are going to use that minoritarian structure because, of course, the courts are the least democratically accountable branch of government. And so they're going to use that minoritarian structure to enact their agenda that, the vast majority of Americans don't support, because most Americans do support a woman's right to choose. Most Americans want safe and secure elections. Most Americans support unions and don't want this judicial attack undermining the labor movement. And so I think for all of those fights, it's important that Democrats start. I hate this analogy because of the sort of violent metaphor, but we need to stop bringing a knife to a gunfight, and we need to say that we're gonna be pushing full on for things like court expansion, for Supreme Court term limits, for a policy to say that you need a supermajority of the Supreme Court to overturn little d democratically passed legislation, for ethics to bind Supreme Court justices, again, like Senator Whitehouse has been pushing, so that they have to abide by the same code of ethics that the district court judge that I just clerked for had to abide by, and larger reforms for district courts as well, right? We should not be allowing a single district court judge to pass a nationwide injunction like that Trump-appointed lunatic in Texas who a couple months ago tried to have a nationwide restriction on critical abortion medication with a legally indefensible opinion. So there's a lot to do on that front. And then, the fifth, and this is maybe related to a lot of these other issues, but we need to rebalance our economy. We have an economy that is stacked, that is rigged for the folks at the top, right? Millionaires and billionaires are making more than they ever have. Way too many working people are struggling. There's a lot of different pieces that go into that. There's antitrust, anti-monopoly policy like David Cicilline has been leading. There's policy to make it easier for folks to organize in unions, because we know that the labor movement is the most powerful tool that working people have to get a fair shake, to have an even playing field with bosses. We need to fight for protections for workers, for immigrants. There's so much we need to do to sort of rebalance that. Healthcare is a big piece of that as well, right? We've got a healthcare system that does not treat healthcare as a right for everyone, but rather an opportunity to make corporate profits off of our injuries and illnesses. I'm proud to be the only candidate in this race that has a real record of standing up to fight for Medicare for all. And I think it's really, really important that we're pushing to take on big pharma, to take on the health insurance executives, to say that healthcare should not be a corporate profit opportunity. It should be something that's helping people when they need it and providing folks with the supports they need to live healthy, dignified lives.
I wanted to spin off of that for 1 second because it feeds into some of that. What I don't hear from a lot of the candidates, and they don't talk about it, but it seems to be the root of all evil, is the need for campaign finance reform.
The root of all evil, that's a really, really good framing, because in all of these issues, the fundamental problem is that you have these entrenched interests that are making a lot of money and then are able to take a slice of that money and put it into campaign contributions, put it into hiring corporate lobbyists, and then are able to rig the rules to make it harder for them to be regulated, to make it easier for them to keep making more money. So then they have more resources to put into rigging the rules further. So then they make more money, then they have more resources to put into rigging the political rules further. I think, gun violence is a really good example of this, right? We are living in barbarism. I mean, the fact that we are dealing with these senseless tragedies every day on the news, in our communities, and our political leaders refuse to step up and take action to get these military-style weapons off the streets, to have common sense gun violence prevention measures. Every year that I was in the State House, I introduced the high-capacity magazine ban bill. so grateful that that finally passed. And that happened because volunteers, regular people with groups like Moms Demand Action and the Coalition Against Gun Violence came together and organized and built enough people power that they were able to overcome the gun lobby and all of its resources and campaign contributions. But the fact that money talks so loudly in our political system corrupts and perverts so many of these processes. It's a huge issue at the national level. It's been, in some ways, we've had stricter campaign finance reform at the state level, which has been great. I was very disappointed this year. I know we're getting into state from federal, but I was very disappointed this year that the state house, the General Assembly, passed legislation increasing the campaign finance contribution limits by 100% in Rhode Island. I think we need to be going in the opposite direction of that. And so, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because it is tied to everything else that we're talking about.
Aaron, you're the third candidate we've had on, and reading the forum the other night, the general census is that the 10 Democrats that were there pretty much all agreed on everything. We started out with 34 candidates, and I think as we interview almost every single Democratic candidate, you guys are all going to have the same priorities and all have the same thoughts and maybe ideology. Why do you think we have so many candidates, and if everybody has the same priorities and thoughts and ideology, why can't the party or the candidates all get behind one and say, let's make sure we keep this Democrat? On the flip side, what separates you from the other dozen or so Democratic candidates if you all have the same priorities?
Well, I do think there are some big differences in this race among priorities, among record. And I think record matters a lot. We talked about climate. I'm very proud to be the only candidate in this race that's been endorsed by environmental and climate organizations like Climate Action Rhode Island, Climate Hawks Votes, the Jane Fonda Climate Pact, Bill McKibben, the climate leader who founded 350.org. And those folks are with me because there might be a number of people who say we support climate action, but they know there's one candidate in the race who actually has been doing this work for many years, who's been engaged in trying to block fossil fuel infrastructure, who's been, playing a role in creating new clean energy programs in our state, who's been supporting court cases to actually take on big oil. Because again, it's one thing to say something, it's another thing to have receipts and say, I've been doing this work and I understand what we actually need to do to make change. The same thing goes for Medicare for all. Every year that I was in the state legislature, I introduced legislation to create a state level single payer bill. And I was attacked for that in 2018. Folks spent a lot of money on the airwaves pushing me on that. So there's a level of, that you can, I think voters can trust and feel confident about what I would say and do if I were to be elected for Congress, because I've been saying and doing the same things now for many years in our state. I think there's also, a difference in record as far as being able to actually bring people together and get stuff done. As I mentioned, during my time in the state legislature, I was able to build coalitions to win some significant policy change, paid sick days, the first increase in the minimum wage for tipped workers in our state in 20 years, new community solar and virtual net metering programs to make renewable energy more accessible for working people, expanded harm reduction strategies to prevent overdose deaths in our state, kicking off the push to reform solitary confinement in our prisons. And so it's not easy to actually make change. I mean, I learned this when I was first elected. I came into the state house as a bushy-tailed, idealistic, progressive young man, and then you get up there and you realize, oh, I'm one of dozens and dozens and dozens of legislators, and they don't all agree with me. And it's a majoritarian system. We need to actually get to we need to build coalitions in order to get stuff done. And the work of figuring out how do you actually do that? How do you build the relationships? How do you set up the inside game and the outside game to work together, to put pressure and to make the persuasive case to actually get stuff over the finish line? Again, it's something that I've been really grateful to David Cicilline. It's been lovely to have a congressperson who we know is not just on the right side of the issues, but is really effective in using that platform to actually move an agenda. And I think that's the kind of work and leadership that we need moving forward, and that's the kind of work that I've been striving to be a part of and contribute to in our state for many years.
Aaron, I had lunch several weeks ago with a local office holder who would have been a pretty attractive candidate for this seat, who said that they would not be running because, and others that he or she knew would not be running because they just didn't seem that being in Congress was an effective way to get things done, particularly the way Congress is today. How do you respond to that?
I mean, it's a great point, right? This is a dysfunctional body in a lot of ways, and people have asked me, why do you want to go up there? Like, you know who you'd have to work with up there, right? Which, yeah, it's a great point. Again, I cut my legislative teeth in a chamber that was dominated by someone you probably remember named Nicholas Mattiello. So it was not an easy place to be a young 24, 25-year-old progressive trying to get big things done. But I figured out how to navigate those dynamics and build the relationships and build the organizing infrastructure necessary to put pressure on the system to actually win some real change. And I think that those things are possible in Congress. I think I'll say three things. One, I have not given up hope on the potential for bipartisan action in certain specific areas. And we've seen that from the leadership of David Cicilline. He led this antitrust, anti-corporate monopolies push in the House, and he was able to build some real bipartisan energy around that. He founded the House Antitrust Caucus. There are two co-chairs of that. One's David Cicilline. The other is Congressman Ken Buck, who is a far-right MAGA extremist from Colorado. But David built that relationship. He came to understand that this person who he didn't agree with on almost anything had concerns about big tech and the sort of oppressive role that they were playing in our economy in smothering competition for small businesses. And David said, there's an opportunity here, and was able to sort of move forward together. So I think there are certain areas, and obviously I have experience doing just that in the legislature, finding some areas where you don't agree with someone on a lot, but you've got this point, and let's figure out how we can work together to get it done. So that's one possibility, and you should always sort of have your eyes wide open and be doing the work to see where might those opportunities be. It is also 100% true that the Republican Party, in many ways, this is going to get me in trouble to say, but like in many ways is becoming a death cult. And on a lot of the issues we care about, we're not going to be able to see the kind of change we need until Democrats win back control of Congress. And so I think whoever's elected to this seat, again, Rhode Island's 1st Congressional District, this is a deep blue seat. Whoever wins this seat should be committed to spending 90% of their political energy, not just focused on their own reelection, but focused on supporting the larger Democratic Party effort, supporting the frontline districts, the races that we need to win back control. And I do think that we are going to win back control of Congress in 2024, because the Republican Party, I just don't think that they're offering anything to regular people right now, but election conspiracy theories and hatred and division, right? Like, they're trying to put the blame for the pain that a lot of working families are feeling right now onto immigrants, onto queer and trans folks, right? They're trying to sow division and hate among regular people so we don't notice that it's them who's taking away our rights. And that always rings all my alarm bells. My grandfather was a refugee from the Holocaust, and he taught me growing up exactly where those strategies of hate and division can lead us to. And I think most voters are smarter than that, and they're not going to buy that. And so I think we've got a very good path in 2024 to win back control. And there's a lot of work to do between now and then to make sure that if and when Democrats do win back control, we're ready on day one to be pushing for the ambitious people first agenda that we deserve, that we're ready to push for things that show whose side we're on. You know, there's policies like banning stock trading for members of Congress, that it is an absolute disgrace that we did not pass that when we had control of Congress. And it is essential that we do the organizing work now to make sure that as soon as we win back control, we're doing things like that show folks that, yes, there's a swamp and it is a Republican Party issue, and the Democrats
Not
are the
just
ones.
a Republican Party issue. There are Democrats who, in fact, don't want to see that change.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that is, I think, one of our biggest electoral liabilities right now, that, you know, when Donald Trump talked about the swamp, there's a reason it resonated. And obviously he was BSing, and he, you know, created an administration that was more representative of the swamp than any we've ever had. But he was able to say both parties are corrupt. And you know what? There was enough truth in that, and enough frustration among regular people because of things they'd seen, that a lot of people bought into that. And again, Trump was completely BSing and hoodwinking folks, but the Democratic Party needs to do a lot better to make sure that can't happen, and that we are setting an example. And you're absolutely right that there are folks that get their own self-interest involved in ways that are incredibly catastrophic to the world we're trying to create.
Aaron, I've been putting it this way, that if you could put a little fortune cookie sized note in every CD1 voter's pocket, what would you want it to say about you for them to consider when going to cast their vote? I know we talked a lot about considering record, but as a follow-up to that as well, I'm wondering what you do want people to also consider while deciding who they're going to vote for. So what's something you want everybody to know about you, and what is something that they should be considering when they're looking at the right now 12 Democrats?
I think it's hard to get it down to a fortune cookie size, but
I was thinking about that. So
I think it can be a big cookie. You know, I think it is desperately important that we have leaders who are going to be fighting with everything they've got to build an economy that works for everyone, not just folks at the top. And I've been doing, you know, I've spent close to the last 15 years now fighting to make a difference for everyday Rhode Islanders. And that's a record I'm very proud of. The coalition we're building with leadership, with endorsements and support from climate environmental orgs, from labor orgs, from all the leading progressive organizations, from the Congressional Progressive Caucus, which was the caucus that David Cicilline helped lead as vice chair. You know, I think it's clear that that we're the choice in this race that is putting forward the most ambitious policy platforms, and that has the record to back it up. And for folks who are excited about that kind of vision, I'd say, you know, we would love to have your support.
And I would just want to get your website out for those who might listen and not watch. It's pretty much your name.com. So AaronRegunberg.com. Well, actually, it's not pretty much. It is AaronRegunberg.com.
Yeah, when he had the kid, he didn't change his name.
No. Frank, any follow-up?
I do have. Yeah, you supporting Joe Biden?
Yes, I think we've seen more progressive victories under this administration than any since FDR and the New Deal.
That's what Green said.
Haven't agreed with everything, and there's things that I would want to be pushing for stronger leadership on, but it is desperately important that we reelect Joe Biden. And I'm all in, just like I was all in 2020. After he won the nomination, I was organizing phone banks into Florida and Ohio every week among my base of volunteers. This is a high stakes election, right? Literally, the future of our democracy is on the line, and we can't afford anyone to be standing on the sidelines.
Aaron, we could talk for hours, I'm sure, but I was wondering if there was anything that you had hoped that we were going to talk about today that we haven't gotten to, anything that you wanted to make sure you got off your chest before we wrap up?
It's so great to connect with you. It's been a little while, Frank, so I'm so glad we were able to.
Yeah, it's good to see you too, Aaron.
Absolutely. And I appreciate what you guys do. There are a few things, talking about democracy, there's a few things more important to it than local, robust media. And it's under assault in a lot of different ways and by a lot of different forces. So I appreciate the work that you do, informing folks and having these kinds of conversations.
My convoluted belief is that when the media ceases, when free press, and press meaning all media, ceases, and when labor unions are crushed, democracy dies.
I think that's exactly right. And that is why the forces of, let's call it what it is, fascism, on the far right are so dedicated to destroying local media, to taking over, to consolidating, and of course to destroying the labor movement, to undermining the capacity of folks to come together and build stronger unions and get good contracts. And one of the things that gives me a lot of hope, again, it's folks like yourself that are doing this work and bringing new energy into it. And it's seeing a new generation of folks getting engaged in the labor movement and starting new organizing at their work sites and saying, we're not going to let those tactics of distraction and division distract us. We're going to come together and build solidarity, because we know that is the way that we can take on those millionaires and billionaires and win a better future for all of us.
And we've talked about endorsements with some other candidates, and I will say that if people go to your website, aaronregunberg.com, and click on endorsements, you'll see 10 or so organizations, as well as representatives, influencers, people, all different backgrounds of people who are endorsing you as well. So aaronregunberg.com.
And we've got one very exciting one that's coming out tomorrow. Just want to
a preview,
pump up some excitement.
Can Frank and I guess? Can we make this a game show right now?
I can't say anything. It'll be coming out tomorrow.
Okay.
Johnny Carson. Oh no, that's not it.
Johnny Carson. Aaron, why do you stay in Rhode Island? What do you love about Rhode Island? What are you passionate about, Rhode Island? Why not move over the border to Massachusetts? Why not go to another progressive state? What makes you love Rhode Island? What makes you stay here?
Oh my gosh, I love so much about Rhode Island. It's just the best. It's the quirkiest place. We've got the most incredible character. It's a wonderful place to be raising my son. I mean, obviously summer in Rhode Island is magic. I'm a huge coffee milk fan. You can get it in other places, but if I were to win this seat, the priority 100% would be to be on the last flight into Washington every week and the first flight back. My wife's a public defender. She's got a full career here. She's not going anywhere. And so there's work you got to do in Washington, but I would be here every possible minute that I could, even if it meant, sacrificing some meetings or things that, you might ideally want to get to, because I think it's really important that our leaders stay connected to the community that they want to represent.
Excellent. All right, Mr. Prosnitz, anything else, my friend?
No, Aaron, thank you much for being with us today, and good luck.
Thanks a million. Have a great one.
Thank you, Aaron. We will chat with you soon.
Sounds good.
All right. That is Aaron Regunberg, aaronregunberg.com, where you can find out all sorts of great or interesting or informative information about his campaign, about Aaron. Of course, we talked about it with other candidates. None of these candidates would turn away any kind of money if you wanted to make a monetary donation towards their campaign. You can see all the endorsements for all of these candidates as well for him, but also on their websites. Frank, that's a wrap on number 1 of 3 today.
Yeah, just one comment. He talks about his activism and all of that. He is what he is. Aaron Regunberg represents what he has done and what he stands for. And you either like him or you don't. But I admire him for his honesty and transparency.
Excellent. All right, Mr. President, we will see you in just a short while when we have Newport
That's
School
right.
Superintendent Colleen Burns-Germain joining us in just a short while. And then later on, we will get back to the candidates with Gabe Amo, who joins us just after 2 p.m. today. If you want to catch any of these interviews, all available on whatsupnuke.com. You can go back and see the first couple that we have done, or you can listen to them on the go. On behalf of Frank, as well as myself, all of us here at What's Up Nuke, we want to thank Aaron Regunberg for joining us today. Thanks for watching.